welcome everybody who has joined. Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate that in today's world where you have so many things happening, it's hard to find the time. I'd also just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today. And while we're joining from all across the country, I pay my respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with us today. I think it's really important as we come together to discuss skills and capability and opportunity that we recognise that this country holds the world's oldest continuing culture, and it's where skills and learning has always been built through lived experience, community and practice. And I think that's an important point to remember. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to now welcome my colleague, Mark Keough, who's the Executive Director and co-founder of SkillsAware. And as he said before, I'm Yasmin King, also a director and co-founder. And to start us off, we thought we might just play a short compilation of why we thought it was important to focus on construction today. Can I hand over to you, Mark, to play that?
Sure. So let's just see what other people are saying in the community about this. So let's see if this...
Right now, builders are telling me we face a shortfall of more than 83,000 tradespeople. To put that into perspective, that's enough to fill every seat in the Sydney's Olympic Stadium, and we'd need each of these people on the tools just to meet today's demand. Those numbers break down to around 22,000 more carpenters, 17,000 electricians, 12,000 plumbers, 4,500 bricklayers, and around 3,000 concreters. Without them, slabs don't get poured, frames don't get built, and bricks don't get laid.
A new report has warned a shortage of construction workers in Queensland will cause building delays and cost blowouts. Queensland has a lot of work in the pipeline, everything from housing to roads, hospitals to energy. The state government's spending a record $116 billion over the next 4 years, and it's all being supercharged by the Olympics. The problem is, who is going to build it?
There's no doubt that the availability of skilled workers has been the biggest problem that the Queensland industry is facing.
Construction Skills Queensland has done the maths. We're already about 15,000 workers short, but that's projected to rise to 35,000 in 2028.
So that's some really, really stunning figures. And if you add on the Civil Contractors Federation, who say that we're going to be short 330,000 workers within the next 2 years. So, I mean, the numbers are just extraordinary, aren't they, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what's fascinating about this though is skills is one factor. There are other factors, of course, but there are many, many, many people who have the skills, and if they could get recognised, could have become leaders in the field, could become supervisors, could be really making a contribution. So that's the space we're working in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that none of this is any shock to those of you who are working in construction every day as you're trying to work out how the hell you're going to fuel your pipeline with the workforce that you have. And I mean, it's fair to say, Mark, the government is trying to respond in doing some things. And I think the budget saw some announcements, didn't it?
Yeah, it's very clear, isn't it, that the government recognises the problem, the industry recognises the problem. The difficulty is investment in the mechanics of change, and that's where we feel like there needs to be a greater contribution from the actual training sector and also from innovation.
Yeah. And I think it's that whole concept of, there's certainly things happening from the top down in what government's trying to do, but we need to see some things happen from the bottom up as well. And I think that's where something like SkillsAware can play a role. I think the added challenge, and I know for those of you working in construction, is that while the feds are saying cutting red tape, what I hear is from people in the sector is how many of the different states are actually putting more red tape in place. So, for example, the design and construct legislation in New South Wales, some of the requirements for registration in Queensland, we've got the Building and Plumbing Commission happening in Victoria. So all of there's this incredible compliance complexity as well as you're trying to find people to do the work and to do quality work. Because I think, the concept of just saying, just quickly shorten training and make it easier, you're just basically delaying a problem because, you still need quality. And I think that's where we see you can't compromise on just pushing a pipeline. You actually have to make sure that the pipeline shows evidence of people's capacity.
Well, we all remember the horrible experience, don't we, of the great boom in roof insulation and how just employing unskilled workers caused, deaths and health issues and all sorts of things. So we don't want that. What we need to do is have an evidence-based approach to recognition, and that's the key. People have got to be able to demonstrate that they can do the job, and then they need to be offered the job. And that's a whole pipeline question, which I'm not sure if everyone's really focused on. People are making announcements about it, but the mechanics seem to be falling short.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's talk about how we think we can help in addressing this challenge, Mark.
Yeah. So some people will know what SkillsAware does, but one of the things we've done in our previous webinar series is we haven't actually shown it. So we're just going to do that. Is now a good time for that? Shall we have a little look?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. So let me just do a very, very fast walkthrough of SkillsAware. This is our new, and I've got to say, SkillsAware is new. It's a big idea. And what we're discovering is that there's a lot of market education required in order to understand skills and what they look like, and also to support people who might not be digitally literate at first attempt. But what we're discovering, and we've started pilots in the construction area, is we're discovering with a bit of coaching, a bit of support, people can use this tool and can accelerate their recognition, either in an occupational recognition service type of arrangement, which most of the state governments now are looking at, or by just accelerating specific skill recognition in specific competencies and skill sets, or indeed in traineeships and apprenticeships and so on. So this is applicable in all of those sort of domains. So what I'm going to show you first is how we onboard people. And what we've got is a customizable sort of tell us about yourself to start with, and upload any evidence you've got: job description, previous work history, performance histories, skill sets that you've been or skill records that you've got from compliance, training courses you've attended, anything that's got a textual representation of evidence of skill. We'll do, and not too far away, that will include videos and video transcripts. So we're working on that in the background right now. Then we ask about your general skills, what you're good at, and all of this gets fed into a AI agent, and the AI agent uses this onboarding information to then start, and I'll just submit that and get to the dashboard. And the AI agent uses that information to suggest a bunch of skills. Now, the skills we're looking at here are the Australian competencies, all 15,000 of them in our database, and all of the ones from the construction industry are all there. You can see the codes, which many will be familiar with. You've got suggested skills, you can hide them. There's about 100 suggested skills here that I can choose. Construct roof gardens. Well, I haven't done any of that. This is Mick Russo, who's a brickie. This is a made-up persona, but we decided to pick on Mick. He's a builder's labourer, bit of a brickie, but never got qualifications. Works in bricklaying, and so Mick and his coach, who's helping him through this process, engage in a chat with an AI bot, and is asked questions, encouraged to load more evidence, and evidence is recognised in three important forms. And this is the important new one, self-claimed evidence. I have done this. I've done this for years, but no one's ever recognized that I can do it. Second one is organizational evidence, where I have done this and my organization has evidence that I've done it. And the third one is certified evidence, where you may have formal qualifications from other activities in your life. Once we get beyond suggested skills, you add, using the add thing, to your shopping cart, which is the My Skills area. Now, this is your portfolio of skills. We're starting to build a portfolio in order to get RPL or get recognition. Now, you'll see in this portfolio, we've got this, I'm going to work with this construct brick and block structures and features. And what I've done, what Mick has done, is he's responded to all this. He's loaded a lot of evidence. And you can see here, there's an experience score and a formal score. Now, Nick has no formal experience, but he's got 46 out of 50 for informal experience and self-claims. And that's a very high score. Now, this is not an assessment. What it is the probability that the evidence Mick has provided is sufficient for RPL, and that's designed to guide an assessor. When you have all of this, what you can do is a number of things. One of the neat things is you can seek an endorsement using encrypted email from a previous supervisor or a previous peer or someone who's got some evidence that they can share, and you send that message off to an endorser and they can send through an endorsement, and that just adds to the evidence. Very powerful new feature we've got in the system. And then the last thing we'll do is I'll show us just how an assessor would view this. So when you view the skill package, this looks like a certificate. It's really just a certificate of evidence. It's not a certificate of completion, but it's got all the details you need for an assessor to look at. It shows every element of the skill. It shows the skill definition. It shows where the score has come from, where the evidence has come from. It's got links to each artifact of evidence. And above up here, it's a URL. So you can copy the URL, share it with an assessor in a report, and then the assessor can work with you to get RPL. The other thing I'll just show, because I haven't shown it, is the Evidence Hub. At any time, you can add more evidence, and the AI mapping will look at the evidence and map it to whether it's organisational or self-claimed or certified evidence, and then allow you to, you'll see this here, go down here, it'll allow you to update your score because you've added more evidence, and I can go and look and update my score and press the update button and it will increase my score. I reckon that's enough to show for now.
Yep.
Yasmin, that's the fastest demo I've ever done, but at least it's an orientation for those who haven't seen SkillsAware as yet. So we're having some lovely experiences in pilot projects at the moment, and people having real positive experiences of recognition. And maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think organisations underestimate is how actually making somebody feel that their skills are visible is actually something that can help with retention because people feel recognised and valued because of it. And I think one of the other things that's been very interesting is where a lot of organisations do a lot of internal training, often because it's sort of just done from their perspective, people just think I'm being made to do this. But because it's not being externally validated for them, they don't actually see the value of it. And this can actually really help with having those skills that you're learning on the job and doing with compliance training actually recognised. And it's also an ability for somebody to have an ongoing record of, we talk about lifelong learning and then we don't actually encourage people to keep records of everything they do. If somebody would have asked me all the corporate training I've done in my career, could I provide evidence of it? Because it was never, thought about, I would struggle. So I think encouraging people to think about that in a positive way, that it's about demonstrating their skills, is a really good outcome for being able to recognise what people can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the experience we're seeing, I think, is that people are either they have a lot of evidence. Everyone's different. Either they've got a lot of evidence, or they've got evidence they don't know they have.
Yeah.
And so that's where the humans in the loop are so important. We're finding having somebody who's available for a bit of upfront support and coaching at the early part of the process, and then an assessor available later. But what we are finding is the extraordinary time saving in this process, not just the outcomes, but the time saving in the process. In other words, gathering the evidence and doing it, and then getting it mapped against the competencies. What used to take weeks and months, people are doing in hours. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, I think it's helping assessors in that they can say, look, if you've got no formal evidence and you're only going to be using organisational or self-claimed evidence, come to us when your number reaches whatever they determined. So instead of this toing and froing, oh, you haven't got enough, you haven't got enough, you haven't got enough, you've got to come back with more. And obviously the system also somebody can actually ask, how do I improve my score? And it will give guidance. It won't do it for you, but it will give guidance of what sort of things you can go and seek to improve your score. It's also worth mentioning that you can talk to the AI agent as
Yeah.
opposed to type. So for somebody who's not comfortable with inputting data, they can do that. And the other benefit is that it can do it in multiple languages. I mean, the output's always English, but you can if you need to converse in different languages. So which I think is also good, particularly in this industry where you've got a lot of people who might be from migrant backgrounds and English is not their first language.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Now I'm going to ask you the really hard question. What do you think ASQA thinks about this?
Well, we know in one of our pilots that they have actually seen the process. I think the fundamental thing that needs to be made clear is that this does not make decisions. The decision is made by the assessor, but it helps the assessor in that it does that administrative mapping very fast. And it also very clearly articulates why it's made the probability assessments that it has. And so that assessor can see that in quite granular detail and say, I want to have a bit more look at this, or there's clearly a gap here, and this is where somebody needs to have additional training, etc. The other thing we found in one of our pilots is that people who thought that it would be a lay down misère because of their experience that they would get RPL straight away actually were able to clearly see themselves that they actually didn't have sufficient and that they needed to do more. And that's been an unintended benefit that we've heard from assessors in the process that they didn't expect.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you're making. And the other one that is the big, difficult one in this world is the evidence legitimate? Is it fraudulent? But what we know is that no one can prove that. But what we can do, like with the endorsement button and the endorsement system, is we can encrypt some things and we can make them more likely to be able to be validated or verified. But you still have to the assessing organisation still has to have policies in place that will weed out people who are not taking a legitimate approach to getting recognition. So yeah, it's not possible. It would be a terrible thing if we had an AI evidence manager that was telling people you're being fraudulent because they could get that wrong, and we don't want that. We need the human in the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I see as a great opportunity is actually for the skills of assessors to actually be focused on the things they should be and not on an administrative process, which is a large part of why people don't like doing RPL. Ron's got a good question here. He's saying, given the budget and funding allocations for Trades Recognition Australia to overhaul how migrant and overseas trained trade skills are assessed and licensed in Australia, what do we think about this?
Well, I think it's a great initiative. The difficulty is that the government has a tendency to fund peak bodies rather than peak projects. And so, often very large amounts of funding gets dissipated as organisations like Trade Rec in Australia try to herd all the cats in the vet system. There's a lot of people to get organised. So, of course, we'll be in touch with those people and trying to make sure they're aware of the service we're offering. We've decided to do this as a private service, right? So you could argue that a government organisation could provide a service like SkillsAware. But if that happened, the way Australia operates, it would be all the normal interstate jealousies would apply and so on. So what we've decided to do is just be in the marketplace. And we hope that people like Trade Recognition Australia look at all the great work we're doing and we can work with them or with people that they choose to fund to do the acceleration work. So we're very active in engaging with those people, and let's hope that we can make a difference. There's a certain. I mean, we're a commercial organisation, but we're all very experienced. We've been around this a long time, and someone said to me, how courageous of you guys to just say we've got to do something, and I'm not sure if we're courageous or what, but and you always worry when people say you're courageous, but that you might actually just being foolish. But the truth is, change needs to happen, and sometimes it can only happen from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Money can come from the top down, but the real change needs to come from the bottom up.
Yeah, yeah. And having been involved in a couple of tech startups in my life, I know that you can have the best product in the world, but if people don't want to use it, don't engage with it, it won't work. And
Right.
and I think the fact that we've made this from it's the individual who owns the data and it's from their perspective is a really critical differentiator because that incentivizes the individual to engage, right? Because there's something in it for them, right? And I often use the example of, I look at what we've done, for example, with health records. People don't see that as their health record. They see it as the government's health record or doctors' health record, not theirs. And I think that's why it's had, a challenging engagement.
We use the metaphor, the excellent metaphor, I think you thought of it, of that when you start to form your skills portfolio, it's like a shopping cart. And in many ways, skills are a tradable entity. And my research says that most of us have 700, 800, 1,000 skills. You can never write them on a resume, but you can recognize them and identify them in a database and a portfolio. And so that's our aim, is to help everybody recognize the breadth of their skills. Ron, in some ways it's a currency. They're actually going down that pathway in the United States, the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and there's new federal legislation in the United States where they're recognizing skills as a tradable currency and dealing with it that way. In other words, funding comes associated with it as a commodity, and that's a fascinating approach. It's got its pluses and its minuses, but that's worth investigating if any of you are interested in looking at that. That's the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation and recent legislation that's come before the House of Representatives in the US around skills currencies. Whether that's the best approach for Australia, I'm not so sure, but there's certainly merit in getting to the grassroots and working with individual. That's what we're doing. We're working with individual builders, labourers, and trying to help them.
Yeah. And Michelle's got a question here. In light of encouraging lifelong learning, who pays for the seat for the RPL candidate if they want to keep uploading to their portfolio for further upskilling? Can they take ownership of it and perhaps move it to another RTO? Mark, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, well, that's our vision, but unfortunately, the Australian system is not structured that way. There is a certain expectation that the government pays for training or subsidises training, and so who pays is always tricky. But the individuals are paying. What we would say is that let's just say you've got to pay $3,000 to get RPL for a certificate 3 in something, let's say in carpentry. that $3,000 is going to the administrative cost of doing that. So what we're looking to do is reduce that administrative cost and make it cheaper for everybody, make it still profitable and okay for the RTO, make it cheaper for the individual, and make it cheaper for the economy. That's our goal, really directly. So who pays is critical, but someone's got to pay for effort, human effort. So there's no doubt about that. What we're trying to do is get governments to be a bit more enlightened about the importance that the money gets to the grassroots. It doesn't get sucked up in bureaucracies.
Yeah. I think the other part, though, in answer to your question, Michelle, is that ultimately we see that it will get sponsored by, through an RPL process or through an employer doing it, but then it will be the individual who then chooses to maintain their portfolio and own it. And so they'll pay a subscription, like a Netflix subscription, to keep it. That's our ultimate goal, and that they will then continually update it through their life and through whatever jobs and whatever on-the-job training or volunteering or whatever they do, so that they can continually. And I think it's going to become critically important in a world where, the concept of a traditional career path is really dissipating, right? People will be a portfolio of skills which they will then need to package up to determine what sort of jobs and roles they're doing.
Yeah, and the tricky thing is, as we know, we've all heard employers say, if I train them, I don't want to train them to leave, right? But that attitude has to change. And that change in attitude's got to come from the top down.
Yeah.
Someone's got to have the courage in senior political and bureaucratic leadership to say, look, if we're going to invest in training, it needs to be for the community and the economy, not just in that kind of pernicious manner of like, well, if I spend money on training my people, they're just going to leave me. Well, if they're leaving you, it's not because you spent money on the training. It's probably for some other reason. But nonetheless, we've got to get that out of the marketplace. That's not helpful to anyone.
Yeah, I think also that we do actually spend a lot on training. If you look at how much money is spent across the Australian economy, it's significant, I think, and we're one of the highest countries spending on training, but yet we have one of the lowest productivities. So something we're doing is not working, right?
Yeah.
So we need to do things differently, or else, it's, what is it? The definition of insanity: keep doing the same thing
over and over and over again.
Over and over, and you don't get a different outcome.
Well, it's been great today, and this will be available. I know some attendees will look for this podcast as a link, and there are a couple of people who registered who couldn't attend, so we're going to make sure they get the link. This will be available. It's on our website. We're creating a whole series of webcasts for ongoing support for the industry.
And hopefully, and if anybody would like to reach out for more specific information, Mark and I are always very happy to assist and give you a more detailed look. But we really think that in order to do something different, we're going to have to start looking at taking more innovative approaches, and certainly we hope that we're going to be part of that.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time. Really.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Thanks,
Thank
Yasmin.
you, Mark.
Yeah.
And have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye.